Well, hey there. Did you forget about me? I didn't forget about you. It's me, Daniel Hadaway, and this is Drummer Daily. I am back after, if you're listening to this in real time, meaning you're listening to it shortly after it's been posted, this is my first episode of the year 2018. I took, I think it probably was maybe 3 weeks off. It was a good while that I took off from doing the podcast and posting a lot to social media, basically doing all the other things that I do. I took some time off, but I'm back and I'm excited about this year and everything that we've got done, are going to get done. I feel refreshed from taking a break. And I have to be honest, it was really tough, especially towards the end, to hold out. I told myself that the second week of January, which is where I'm at now, that would be when I would get back into everything. And I have to admit that towards the end of my self-imposed break, it was getting really tough not to jump in and start recording podcasts again. It can be hard sometimes to make yourself take a break, especially when you are doing something that you love. And that's kind of what today's episode is about. But I do want to mention that just remember that if you are at any point starting to get gigs, or even if you're playing just for fun for free, remember that at the end of the day, it still is work. And so I think I'm going to do an episode soon about something along these lines as well. But just remember, just because you're having fun doesn't mean that it's not work. And that goes into as well, if you're playing drums for a friend for a gig and they're getting paid for it, and don't feel bad about asking to get paid for your work, because even though you enjoy it, it is still work. Okay, so what I do want to talk about today is kind of what I've been doing during my break. So I did take a break and I did my best not to think too much about all the other things that I've got going on, which includes, this podcast, Pro Drum Academy, Boom Click Bootcamp, my website, other things that I'm doing. But I did want to take the time for my break, and of course it being the end of the year, the beginning of a new year, I wanted to kind of take stock of everything that's going on. So what that meant for me is a lot of different things. But I want you to, as you're following along, let me kind of talk you through this. I want you to think about your own life, and definitely as far as drumming goes, in your pursuit of a drum career or whatever you're doing with music. I want you to kind of do the same things that I'm talking about in my life. I want you to do those things in your life as well. So one of the things I looked at was, okay, what was this past year like for me? And there's a lot of pieces to that I looked at. Like I said, some of the things I'm doing to educate other drummers, which I love doing. What am I doing from a playing perspective? So studio sessions. What am I doing? Oh, back to the education thing. I'm also doing like those drum intensives that I did in 2017. What did I like about doing those? What didn't I like about doing those? What do I like about the studio sessions that I've played this last year? The traveling, I took a year off, almost a year off from doing touring as a drummer. And the traveling thing. And so I wanted to look back at all of those different pieces of kind of what I've been doing. And I want to say, what did I like about that, and what didn't work for me, or what might need to change. But the most important thing that I did was that I decided that I was going to either reduce some things in my life, how much I was doing certain things, or I was going to stop doing some of these things altogether. And I listed out a bunch of things just now. I'm not quite ready to announce or say what those things are. And I'm also deciding to do some new things. So there's some things that I'm not going to do anymore, and I'm going to do some new things in their place. But I do want to tell you one thing that I am going to keep doing is this podcast. So don't worry about that. This podcast will continue on. But I stopped and kind of took stock of everything that I had going on. And I said, you know what? There are some things they're a part of what I've kind of, the life that I've arranged. So being a drummer, the educating part, there are some things that are not as successful as I would like for them to be, or they're not, I don't get I guess I'd call it the return on investment. I don't mean that in a money perspective. I mean, from a fulfillment standpoint, these things that I maybe sacrifice a lot for, but do I get the fulfillment out of them? Those kinds of things. So I made some choices, and I made some hard choices too. But I want you to be willing to do that. What I mean by that, to narrow this down to a drumming thing, is let's say that you play drums at church, and you play drums at church every week, and that is really awesome to you, and you really enjoy it. And you show up on a Sunday morning at church, let's say, and you play for a couple of services maybe or whatever, and you get there early and you leave late, so you're there for 5 or 6 hours during the day. Which I was playing drums at church a lot. That was about how long it took, for me on a Sunday morning. I'd get there. I'd get there maybe at 6:30 in the morning, and then we'd get out of there by 1 or something, something like that. So I just remember that I'd always get home about halftime during the Titans games. I'm a big Tennessee Titans fan, and so the football games would be on during the football season, and I'd get home just in time to catch the second half of the games. So yeah, somewhere around 1 o'clock or so in the afternoon, because where I'm at, the football games, most of the time they start at noon. So anyway, but 5 or 6 hours. And then sometimes we'd have a rehearsal, and let's say you play at church, the same kind of thing. You have another day a week, you do a rehearsal for a few hours. That's 8 hours a week. And you might look at that and say, kind of going back to what I said before, this isn't work, this is fun, I love this. And that is something that you might choose to do. But for me, at a certain point, I realized that I was playing every week at church, and it was just a little too much, because I was sacrificing a lot of time with my family. I was sacrificing really the full experience of going to church with my family, because I was there early and leaving late. It's a different experience when you're playing as part of a church service as opposed to being there. And so I made the choice, this was probably a few years ago, I made the choice to kind of cut back the number of times in a month I was playing at church. And again, it wasn't because I didn't enjoy it and wasn't having the time of my life. In fact, like I said, I'd say this isn't work, this is fun. But I had to take a hard look at it and say, it really is still work. And if I was working an extra 8 hours every week from my normal day job, and taking time away from my family, I might look and say, hey, is there a way I can cut back on that or change that a little bit? I'm not equating church to work. Don't send me angry emails saying that I'm doing that. What I'm just saying is, if you look at it from a time with your family perspective, there is a healthy balance you can find with anything. And so that's what I've been pursuing in my off time these past few weeks. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. From a drum career perspective, is your pursuit or all the different things you might be doing as part of your pursuit, are those things all giving you back what you're putting into them in a way that's meaningful to you? Are there certain things that it can be pretty obvious at this point aren't working, and maybe you should drop those things or change those things or reduce those things, whatever it might be? And in my own life, I just want to say again that there are some things that are all kind of in my world that I'm going to be drastically changing. And I just want to give you a heads up that one of those things that's going to be a positive for you is that I am making a lot more of my resources that I have that normally you have to pay for. I'm going to make those free. And I also am going to be changing around some of the things I offer. I'm trying to make what I do and the coaching that I provide, I'm trying to make it more accessible for more drummers, because the point is I want to help as many drummers as possible. That's one of my missions in life, is to help as many drummers as possible. And I can't do that if you can't afford to actually get my help. I want people to get my help. It doesn't mean anything if no one's doing it. I'm not helping anyone if no one is taking me up on it. So I'm going to be working on some of those things. I'm not ready to announce anything quite yet, like I mentioned, but there's a lot of changes coming for me. And I think the reason why I'm saying that to you is because I think that most of those changes are going to be things that you are going to be excited about, actually, and are going to provide more resources to you as a drummer, whether you choose to pursue being a professional or not. I am putting a lot more into that this year, and so I can't wait to share that with you. But for now, I just want to say thank you for sticking with me through this break. Thank you for being with me. I think we've been doing this podcast for a little over a year and a half, or close to a year and a half maybe. And so I just want to thank you for sticking with me. I did look at the stats recently on this podcast. I counted up, I think I have listeners in almost 80 countries. I think I counted there were 78 countries that I have listeners in right now on this podcast. And I want to thank you personally for listening and hanging out with me and spending a few minutes of your day with me. It does mean a lot. I don't take it lightly. I take this podcast seriously, and I take everything that I put out and say to you seriously, because I do believe that the words we say matter. I do believe that everything that I say, I do believe, and I believe that I'm not going to, I don't want to have any regrets about this podcast at any point down the road. So I just want to thank you for listening. It really does mean a lot to me. And I will see you again, hopefully tomorrow on Drummer Daily. Bye for now.